artist educator and scholar, actually a recent doctorate. I defended my dissertation this past April, and I graduated last weekend, actually. So very fresh and new doctorate. But I've been an artist educator. I've been an artist all my life, and I've been an artist educator professionally for 16 years, working in public schools, K-12 public education. And one of the common questions that I get asked by students and even parents is, how does one become or be an artist? And my response to that is, you gotta be curious, you wanna ask questions, and you want to know how to explore inquiry. Now, this is what artists do. They do these three things. Artists are always being curious, they're always asking questions, and they're always exploring inquiry to help them understand and learn more. Now, before I move forward with this conversation, I want to take a step back and kind of share a story that's a true story from my past. When I first started teaching back in 2001, I was an elementary art teacher, and I worked with grades K through 4. It was very common for my practice to have my students come into my classroom and set them up in a sharing space where I would introduce each lesson with a story or a visual provocation, some kind of artwork from an artist that we're going to be working on and learning about. This particular story involves first graders, and so I have my first graders come into class, I have them sit crisscross applesauce, spoons in a bowl kind of position, and eagerly all their eyes are watching me and ready for me to share some information to them. And I shared the story Tar Beach by Faith Ringgold. And this story is about a little girl and her experiences living in New York City. This story is based on Faith Ringgold's most famous painted story quilt with the same title, Tar Beach. None of my students had heard this story, especially one little girl who was extremely excited about this. So I shared the story, got them all engaged, got them all curious, and then explained and gave some direction that after the story we're going to go back to our tables, and we're going to explore working with fabric and paint. The students got all excited then, energy and bodies moving. They got up and took off for the tables. And as they took off for the tables, I actually noticed something was on the floor. Closer inspection revealed that it was a puddle of urine. One of my students actually peed. Astonished, I quickly kind of cleaned it up and then started thinking, who's the phantom peer and why did this happen? So I started investigating, I'm scanning the room, and I noticed a little girl kind of sitting at the table, fidgeting awkwardly in her seat. And so I approach her name's Kimberly, and I pull her aside away from the other kids and I ask her, I'm like, Kimberly, do you need to use the bathroom? And of course, at this moment, she looks at me with a deer in the headlights kind of look. And she goes, no. And then I say, Kimberly, did you go to the bathroom when I was reading the story? And her head drops down. At this point, I put my hand on her shoulder and I say, Kimberly, you're not in any trouble. I just want to make sure you're okay. Reluctantly, she confessed to being with phantom peer. I then said, Kimberly, how come you didn't use the restroom if you had to go to the bathroom? At that moment, as only a child could do, they gave me the truth. I was so excited about this story and learning how to paint with fabric, I didn't want to miss anything. Of course, I'm like, whew. I sent her off to the nurse to get her change her clothes, and I spent the rest of that class kind of reflecting on the experience. Now, I share that story because not only is it kind of humorous, because it kind of happened and it seems unbelievable, but I learned a very valuable lesson that day about student engagement and the power of curiosity. Later on, I would discover that Kimberly's family, there's a lot of artists in that family, and she's used to painting, but she never painted with fabric before. And like I said earlier, she never heard the story Tar Beach. So her curiosity was piqued. Well, it's been many years since I taught elementary school, and the last few years I've been teaching high school. Many times I think about working with the adolescents and the teenagers, and I would wish some days that my students would get so excited, like Kimberly did, that they'd want to pee themselves over learning. Metaphorically speaking, of course, not literally. But still, there was this, I had my curiosity piqued with this interest in why does curiosity seem to fade as the kids get older? You know, so on my quest to understand this phenomenon, I discovered two culturally pervasive myths that are actually very damaging to education. The first myth is that everyone's naturally curious. The second myth is that everyone knows how to ask questions and how to explore inquiry. My research led me to Dr. George Lowenstein, who's out of Carnegie Mellon, and he studied curiosity, and he believes that curiosity needs to have some bit of background experience or knowledge in order for someone to be interested in what they're doing. What this theory does is it challenges the whole myth that people are naturally curious. Lowenstein's theory is quite interesting to me because it made me think about being more mindful and intentional with how I interact and engage with my students, and made me think about how do I pique their curiosity? What do I do as an educator to make connection with their experiences and their knowledge? But one of the things I discovered about learning about this curiosity was the QFT. And the QFT stands for the question formulation technique. This is a strategy that was developed by Dan Rothstein and Louis Sutana out of the Right Question Institute. This strategy is best described in their book, Make Just One Change, Teach Students How to Ask Their Own Questions. What this strategy does for educators is help them navigate understanding generation of questions, how to help people make questions in meetings that's personal and relevant, and how to examine and explore their learning. What's interesting about this is that if I had known what I know now back in 2001, I think my lessons would have been a little bit more powerful for the students, and I would have more students like Emily more excited and engaged if I had known about being more mindful and intentional with thinking about how to pique their curiosities. What I've discovered since my research and the work that I've done is that when I engage students with visual provocations, information that's of their interests, that is appealing to their sense of aesthetics, that's appealing to their knowledge base and to their cultural awareness, I have greater buy-in and my students are more hungry and interested in learning. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was teaching drawing at the high school level, I taught different studio drawing courses. One of the courses was a graphic storytelling class. And the graphic storytelling class has to do with making individuals, help them develop and design their own characters and stories and visual narratives, similar to comic books and graphic novels. One of the lessons that I'd be working on is figurative drawing, that is drawing people. And the principles of figurative drawing, you're looking at proportion, scale, size, and perspective. And so it's very common to use a mannequin like this with my students to help them look and visualize the human figure and look at proportion, size, scale, and perspective. But again, this is kind of blasé. And aesthetically, it's not really appealing, although it is effective and it is a good resource. I can do better. If I'm being intentional and mindful and knowing my kids, I'm going to give them some kind of visual provocation that sparks their curiosity. So given the graphic storytelling class, I may show them something like this. The Avengers are a group of superheroes that most teenagers, at least the ones that I've experienced working with, are very familiar with. And they know the group, they know what they stand for. And so if I start my lesson, introduce my lesson about learning to draw people and figures, and give them examples that are relevant to their knowledge base and their awareness, like this, I've created a great hook. And now they're interested in seeing how I make connections with them and help them understand to draw figures and what those principles have to do with this information that they're more aware of. One of the things I want to kind of impress upon us is that teachers are people too. And we can succumb to those myths of thinking that people are naturally curious and that people know how to ask questions or they know how to explore inquiry. Oftentimes, teachers take for granted that students may not have background knowledge or experience in the topics that they're teaching in their classroom. What we need to do, again, is be mindful about who those people are that we're working with. Who are the individuals? What do they know? What do they care about? What is relevant to them? This is important because, as I mentioned earlier, curiosity, asking questions, and exploring inquiry, in essence, is what creativity in the arts is about. But it's not only applicable to the arts, and this is why it's so important. Those three skills, being curious and developing curiosity, learning to be asking questions, and learning how to explore inquiry, allows you to open up doors for learning in any subject matter, across any content area, regardless of the student's age. So I want to kind of impress this upon us because in this day and age, technology and education is so important and valued. And I want to be mindful about this, but I want to make people aware that in order for the students to cultivate those 21st century skills, the highly coveted 4 C's, the 4 C's in teacher talk are communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and my personal favorite, creativity. In order for them to be thinking about these skills and acquiring them, they need to be curious. They need to know how to ask questions, and they need to know how to explore inquiry. If technology for innovation and transformation is going to be effective, we need to know how to engage learners. So, this is my call to action today. My call to action is to have us get individuals engaged in learning, whether we're teachers or parents. We want to get folks interested in what they're doing and making relevant use of information and knowledge for them. To do this, it means that our teaching and learning practices needs to be rooted in inspiring curiosity and nurturing the ability to ask questions and explore inquiry. So, what this looks like is relationships first. We need to know with whom we engage. To inspire curiosity, we need to know the individuals we're working with, know their background knowledge, know about some of their lived experiences, and we need to know what makes them tick and what they're passionate about. To nurture inquiry and curiosity, further, we need to teach them how to ask questions and how to generate personal questions that lead them down roads of examination, of inquiry, to help them learn more purposefully and more meaningfully. I know this can be done. I know this can be done because I've witnessed it and experienced it within the context of my art classroom and in the studio as a personal artist. I've also seen this with peers and colleagues that I've worked with across other disciplines. Again, the good news is that being curious, learning to ask questions, and learning to be how to inquire is something that can be done across any academic domain and is essential for learning. Therefore, I'm going to kind of end today with this final thought to kind of leave with you. If we as a society and school systems across the country work together to engage our learners in being curious, learning to ask questions, and learning to examine and explore inquiry, we will undoubtedly help pave the way for a more prosperous future and more meaningful life for them in this 21st century and beyond. Thank you very much.